On July 21st, 2021, Fightful would put out a report that would shake the wrestling world to its core. A bombshell was dropped on us seemingly out of nowhere, and this report said that CM Punk was in talks for an in-ring wrestling return. Yes, CM Punk, one of the biggest stars in the wrestling industry of the last generation, a man who walked away from it all 7 years ago, was apparently in talks to finally make a big return to the squared circle. Upon hearing the news, I feel like we were skeptical to believe it, because this is something that we would hear year after year ever since Punk walked away in 2014. But this time was different. The initial report had a lot of detailed information that led us to believe that this time it was closer than it had ever been. For the first time ever, there was actual reason to have hope. But what's even crazier is that in this initial report that I just mentioned, it said that the company that Punk was most likely heading to for his big in-ring return was AEW. And that was the part that got us AEW fans really talking. Since the inception of AEW, I feel like people rooting for the company to succeed all wanted one thing, and that was for the company to sign CM Punk. And how could we not? He was one of the biggest wrestling stars of his era. But it was because the person he was, the character he had, that a certain section of wrestling fans really resonated with CM Punk. During his meteoric rise in 2011, he spoke for and represented the disgruntled fan who wasn't liking what they were seeing on TV every week. CM Punk was cool, he was counterculture, he had everybody in the palm of his hands every time he had a mic because he would say everything that was on the fans' minds. CM Punk was for the hardcore fan, he was the Batman to John Cena's Superman. But because he left WWE on such a bitter note in 2014, a lot of people wondered if he would ever come back to wrestling. His love for professional wrestling just seemed to be gone, and with WWE being the only major game in town, it seemed like that ship had sailed for CM Punk. But as we know now, the formation of AEW changed everything in the wrestling industry, and it took over 2 years for what seemed like a pipe dream to become a reality. This is Tranquilo Club, and this is, at long last, the game-changing arrival of CM Punk in AEW.
Welcome back.
So why do people love CM Punk? Well, for hardcore wrestling fans, this is a man we saw work his way up from the very bottom all the way to the top of the wrestling industry. CM Punk was one of the first big independent wrestling names to gain momentum, gain a cult following in a post-WCW, post-Monday Night War wrestling world. I was too young at the time, but I do remember my dad saying this name CM Punk and how he was hearing about him, he was reading about him, and how good he apparently was. But I think the first time we ever saw what CM Punk was truly capable of was in Ring of Honor. When Ring of Honor was founded in 2002, CM Punk became one of the talents that the promotion was hoping would flourish into a big star for them. And as we know now, Punk would become a major player for Ring of Honor and helped elevate the entire promotion along with other talents like Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Bryan Danielson. Punk would leave Ring of Honor having had classic matches like his trilogy with Samoa Joe and classic storylines like the Summer of Punk 2005 when it was revealed that he had signed with WWE, which Punk used to his advantage as a heel as he was Ring of Honor World Champion at the time. Punk had already been established as an excellent in-ring worker, but it was during the Summer of Punk where he really showed off how excellent of a character he could be as well. I mean, the guy literally signed his WWE contract on the Ring of Honor World title, and it got insane heat. But anyway, I digress. Because CM Punk had such a great run in Ring of Honor prior to arriving to WWE, this meant he arrived to WWE with a cult following. Hardcore fans loved this guy and they were gonna cheer for him no matter what, and that became evident during his WWE TV debut on an episode of ECW TV. And we all know how it goes when you show up to WWE being cheered for something that Vince McMahon didn't create. You can't get over unless they want you to get over. And from that moment on, it was an uphill battle for CM Punk in WWE. Now, I'm gonna stop right here and say this video is not a CM Punk career retrospective, because other channels have broken down CM Punk's entire career pretty well, and I highly recommend you guys check those out. However, I did summarize his pre-WWE career because I feel it's important context to know what type of person CM Punk is. CM Punk loves professional wrestling. He didn't want to be a WWE superstar growing up. He wanted to be a professional wrestler. He wanted to wrestle in Japan. He didn't mind wrestling in front of a couple of hundred people because, to quote the man himself, this is more than art to him. It took CM Punk 6 years on the WWE main roster to finally get the big break he was looking for. And even then, he didn't succeed because of WWE. He succeeded in spite of WWE. During CM Punk's Best in the World run from 2011 up to the moment he left in 2014, he was one of the hottest wrestlers on the entire planet. When CM Punk had a microphone in his hands, you would listen because this man was so captivating on the microphone. And of course, it goes without saying, the pipe bomb is one of the most iconic promos in wrestling history. But besides that, he was cutting some of the best promos in modern history. To CM Punk, the microphone was a weapon, and because of that, he was able to stand toe-to-toe and sometimes even outdo some of the biggest wrestlers in WWE like John Cena and even The Rock. It was during this run that Punk had his 434-day title reign as WWE champion. Yet despite this, he was never happy during his time in WWE. The schedule, the politics, the toxicity, this all killed CM Punk's love for professional wrestling. CM Punk said it himself, when you get to WWE, you think it's gonna be this magical place that's gonna make all your dreams come true. But for him, it was the complete opposite, and they pushed him to the point where he couldn't take it anymore, and he walked away from it all in January 2014. Punk walked away from WWE being one of their biggest stars, one of their biggest draws, one of their most beloved wrestlers. But let's not get facts twisted here. It sounds like I'm saying CM Punk quit WWE, and that's not the case. Punk left WWE wanting to take a break, wanting to take a chance to recharge, but out of pure pettiness, WWE would go on to fire CM Punk on his wedding day. And that's a mistake that WWE made that CM Punk would never forget. When CM Punk was fired from WWE, there was really no other major wrestling promotion that he could have gone in America. And keep in mind, this is the era where TNA was starting to fall apart. And even if TNA wasn't falling apart, I doubt Punk would have gone anyway due to his previous experience with them. Point being that Punk was completely done with wrestling in his mind at this point. He wanted nothing to do with it. WWE completely killed his love for it. Punk himself would make it clear multiple times that he was done with wrestling. He had no interest in returning, and that he would instead be pursuing other avenues like writing comics and doing UFC. And honestly, pictures of Punk would surface online every now and then, and he never looked happier. He was healthy, he was married, he was living life, and as a huge fan of his, it was great to see. It appeared as though CM Punk had truly moved on, and as a wrestling fan of his, I was a little heartbroken, but as a person, I was happy for him, because at the end of the day, wrestlers don't owe us a damn thing. Meanwhile, after Punk was fired, it was all downhill for WWE's product. Shows started getting noticeably worse. Scripted nonsense, illogical booking, stupid finishes, you name it. And it wasn't like the show was good when Punk was there anyway. He had a reason to leave because he was unhappy with a lot of stuff, his health and creative, but it just started going downhill completely after he was gone. The crazy thing is, even after Punk was gone, WWE audiences would still chant his name, specifically when they were seeing something on the show they didn't like. It's almost like chanting CM Punk's name was an act of defiance. From the moment he left up until even now, this has not stopped. CM Punk's name has become some sort of relic of the past that will always haunt WWE. So as quality of the show started going down for WWE and ratings started going down as well, this meant that there was a section of the wrestling audience that wanted something new, wanted something different. And that's when the Elite and Tony Khan saw an opening and formed All Elite Wrestling, the biggest competitor to WWE since WCW in 2019. Tony Khan himself has never shied away from saying that when he was trying to get AEW off the ground, there was two wrestlers that he wanted to sign. One was Chris Jericho, which he got, and the other was CM Punk. And at the time of formation of AEW, it felt like the timing was right. Here's the son of an NFL billionaire owner starting this legit big budget competitor to the WWE, the likes of which we haven't seen since WCW's prime. What better way for CM Punk to give WWE the ultimate FU than by joining this brand new promotion and legitimizing it right out of the gate? It seemed written in the stars for CM Punk to join AEW since the very beginning. This company represented everything he stood for as well. The Elite themselves are very anti-establishment, just like CM Punk was. The Elite basically ran All In, the largest independent wrestling show in US history, by raging against the machine being WWE. AEW also allows their wrestlers to express themselves far more freely than WWE allows their people. In essence, AEW has the independent wrestling spirit that CM Punk knows and loves so much, just on a major national budget. However, with all those talks and all the speculation that CM Punk would join AEW since the beginning, it wasn't meant to be, as CM Punk said that he wasn't really offered any real deal by anyone in AEW. And later that year, almost all hope was lost when CM Punk would appear and sign with WWE backstage. I mean, sure, the contract was with Fox TV, but a lot of people assumed that this would eventually lead for Punk to make an in-ring return with WWE. However, Punk himself would make it clear that he wasn't interested at all in returning to the ring and that he was there exclusively just to work for Fox and talk about WWE. And it was at this time when the pandemic would hit and it basically scraped any major ideas for wrestling for any promotion for at least 1 year. WWE backstage would end up getting cancelled, therefore freeing up CM Punk for any other wrestling obligations. But of course, as mentioned earlier, CM Punk was showing no desire to return to the ring, but that didn't stop fans from fantasy booking a CM Punk return anytime that AEW would tease a new debut, to the point where Punk would go on Twitter and deny any rumors of him joining AEW. Now, it's important to note that around this time, CM Punk would do an interview on Renee Packett's podcast Oral Sessions, and in this interview, Renee would ask CM Punk what it would take for him to make an in-ring return, and CM Punk would answer, 1, a lot of money of course, and 2, above everything, an interesting story. Punk would even go as far as to say that AEW has far more interesting opponents for him since he hasn't wrestled any of them, and this of course added fuel to the fire. Was CM Punk finally open to making an in-ring return? He was certainly considering it now compared to when he had first left WWE in 2014. Could AEW being successful have changed his mind? Could it have given him the itch to wrestle again? Could one of the biggest wrestling stars of this era, who ended his employment with WWE on such a sour note, go to the competitor and make them bigger than ever? Could we see a shift in the landscape of professional wrestling with CM Punk joining AEW? Well, never say never. The date was July 21st, 2021, when the report from Sean Ross Sapp at Fightful dropped that CM Punk was apparently in talks for an in-ring return with AEW, and the internet went wild. As I said in the intro to this video, this time it felt closer than it ever was before. For one, it was coming from a reliable source, and 2, Tony Khan for months had been saying how he has surprises lined up for when they go back on the road that nobody knows about, only him. And unlike all the other times before, CM Punk said nothing. He didn't deny rumors, he stayed quiet. Then one source started confirming the original report, and then another, and then another, and then it grew out of control and the internet was just speculating and speculating day after day. And we all know the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think one underrated aspect of what made this rumor even more believable this time around is that AEW was now 2 years old. They were a proven commodity and they were white hot. They're back on the road selling out arenas, they're pulling over 1 million viewers every single week, they're selling 17,000 tickets for shows in New York City. If there was any doubt that this company was major league, well, those doubts were put to rest right here. And maybe CM Punk held off on signing with AEW because he was unsure on whether they would succeed or not at first, and I don't blame him, because how many promoters have come around promising the world of this new promotion and then they end up failing? Maybe seeing how hot the company got gave Punk the itch to get get back in the ring. Also, AEW wasn't doing anything to squash the rumors. Usually when there's rumors that they can't deliver on, Tony Khan is quick to dismiss them. But not only was AEW not denying the rumors, they were adding fuel to them. And this all came to a head when AEW announced that the second episode of their new show Rampage would be taking place in Chicago, Illinois at the United Center. In the midst of all these rumors of Punk joining AEW, Tony Khan went and booked the United Center, the largest NBA arena in the country, in Punk's hometown on 3 weeks notice. You don't book an arena that large in that city on such a short notice unless you have something big planned. And all of our biggest hopes were basically confirmed right after that announcement when Darby Allin cut a promo where he would call out the best in the world. And those 4 words was all Darby needed to say to sell out the United Center. AEW sold out the largest NBA arena in the country just based off 4 little words. Just absolutely unprecedented. AEW is already white hot. They're selling out arenas, they're pulling in big ratings, and they're about to bring one of the biggest stars out of a 7-year retirement, something that WWE couldn't do. In the final days leading up to the first dance, AEW really began to lean into the rumors. They started advertising the show as the most anticipated TV event of the year in front of the largest AEW crowd in history. AEW was basically telling us that CM Punk was showing up without actually telling us CM Punk was showing up. And in my opinion, it was genius marketing as it had everybody talking, but there was still a mystery surrounding the whole situation. And so all eyes turned to the United Center on August 20th, 2021 for AEW Rampage, The First Dance. The card for this show was announced 2 days earlier on Dynamite, and it was a 3-match card just as the premiere of Rampage was 1 week earlier. And the matches announced were Jurassic Express versus Private Party in a tag team tournament semifinal, Jade Cargill versus Kiera Hogan, and Jon Moxley versus Daniel Garcia. A card filled with favorites for a rabid Chicago crowd, but we all know what they were there to see. The man from Chicago himself, CM Punk. And so Rampage began, and the world watched as the sold-out United Center opened up the show with chants of CM Punk. They were deafening. Commentary opened up the show by saying the big announcement everybody is waiting for is up next. And so the music stopped, the crowd was chanting for CM Punk, and then it happened. The single most surreal moment I can ever recall as a wrestling fan. Cult of Personality hit, the United Center exploded, and out came CM Punk. People in the crowd are in tears. CM Punk himself looks like he's on the verge of tears, and I kid you not, this is one of the loudest pops in wrestling history. This will go down as one of the greatest moments in wrestling history. The night CM Punk came home, the night he came back to professional wrestling, and he soaked it in completely. And the crowd gave him a reason to. Sure, he was in his hometown, it was always going to be a loud pop, but this was legendary. They treated him like a god. This was a return worthy of one of the greatest professional wrestlers who has ever lived. And I don't care what anyone says, that reaction says it all. CM Punk is one of the best of all time. And then after that epic entrance, after that epic return, we got to see CM Punk step into a wrestling ring for the first time in over 7 years with a live microphone. Punk, being the great wrestling mind that he is, the first words he ever said in AEW put over another younger talent. That talent's being Britt Baker. He said that Chicago really knows how to make someone feel like Britt Baker in Pittsburgh. Punk then said that he didn't have anything planned on his mind to say because he wanted to come out and feel the crowd first and know that it was real. And now that he felt it and knew it was real, he knew what to say. He started off by saying that he was never going to get healthy if he stayed in the place that got him sick in the first place, obviously referring to WWE. Punk then asked the crowd if they wanted to hear a story before sitting cross-legged to a huge pop. Punk's signature pose, sitting cross-legged in the ring, got a huge ovation. That's all he needs to do. That shows you just how special of a talent he is. CM Punk sitting cross-legged in a ring was such a great moment to see in 2021. This year is crazy. Anyway, Punk told a story about his love for professional wrestling and his time in Ring of Honor and how much he loved it, and how in August 13th, 2005, when he left left Ring of Honor, in his mind, that's when he left professional wrestling. Basically, once again confirming everything I said early on in the video, where he was never happy in WWE because of the way they do things, the way they beat the passion out of you. He then said August 20th, 2021 is officially the day CM Punk came back to professional wrestling. He's back to work with young talents who have the same passion that he had before WWE beat it out of him. He's back to settle the score with familiar foes. He's back for the fans, but most importantly, he's back for himself because it's making him happy. He loves this again. And that's the most important part of this entire story. CM Punk fell out of love with professional wrestling and he needed a break from it. But what reignited his passion for the sport was a once-in-a-lifetime alignment of the stars in AEW. AEW brought CM Punk back to professional wrestling. There's another alternate universe out there where AEW doesn't exist and CM Punk never came back to professional wrestling. Imagine that. CM Punk sees AEW as wrestling done right. It reminds him of why he fell in love with professional wrestling in the first place, and that's All Elite Wrestling's greatest attribute in my opinion. And of course, as we all expected, Punk would call out Darby Allin because of what Darby had been saying in the weeks leading up to the first dance. Punk put Darby over big. He said he was a huge fan of his, that Darby always got back up, but that the most dangerous thing Darby Allin can do is get in the ring with CM Punk in Chicago. And so as Darby Allin and Sting looked on from the rafters, CM Punk said that he would see them at All Out, all but confirming the time, the place, and the opponent for Punk's first wrestling match in over 7 years. CM Punk versus Darby Allin at All Out in Chicago, Illinois. A match that will surely give AEW their biggest buy rate in their history. Punk said he had one last thing to say. He said 7 years was a long time to wait for him, so to make it up to everybody in attendance, he said everyone in the United Center would get a free ice cream bar on him. A nice little nod to the running gag of CM Punk demanding ice cream bars. Everything came full circle here. And so Cult of Personality would hit once again as the crowd sang along and CM Punk just soaked it all in. Absolutely surreal moment. A moment 7 years in the making. A moment we never thought we would see. A moment that can be traced all the way back to CM Punk's pipe bomb in 2011. Every single thing that Punk said in the pipe bomb 10 years ago still rings true to this very day. Punk was speaking for the wrestling fan. He was saying what we were all thinking, and then eventually discontent with WWE got so bad that AEW was able to be formed. In 2018, it was proven that there was enough demand for an alternative in professional wrestling. And when AEW was finally formed in 2019, it seemed written in the stars that CM Punk would join them. However, we had to wait over 2 long years for it to happen. The timing needed to be right, and I think everything worked out just fine in the end. This is game changing because CM Punk is a draw. No matter what other wrestlers say, no matter what people on Twitter say, CM Punk is a proven draw. AEW sold out the United Center without even saying his name. They sold it out on speculation alone. This is a man who had his name chanted at almost every major wrestling show for the past 7 years, and he's just shown up at All Elite Wrestling. What I'm getting at is he chose AEW for a reason. He waited 7 years. He didn't go back to WWE. People thought that WWE backstage was him wanting to go back to WWE eventually, but that was not the case. He made that very clear, and in his first promo for AEW, he made it very clear that place killed his passion for the business, but AEW has reignited it. Punk looked healthier and happier in one night in AEW than he ever did in his entire run in WWE. A star of his caliber choosing to go with the 2-year-old promotion has game-changing implications. This was night 1 of Punk in AEW. He wasn't even advertised, and it set the attendance record for AEW in their history. Just imagine what a well-built program between Punk and Omega can do, what type of numbers it'll do in attendance, ratings, or pay-per-view buys. In an era where there's a lot of talk of no one being a needle mover, CM Punk is a genuine needle mover. He always has been, otherwise crowds wouldn't be chanting his name 7 years later. But Punk needed a reason to come back, and that reason is AEW. He loves what they're doing and he wants to help contribute to the company and make it even bigger. It's really interesting because somewhere along the line timeline between the time Punk signed with Fox for WWE Backstage and now where he signed with AEW, something changed. Something changed his mind and he wanted to get back into wrestling. He wanted to make a difference in the industry once again. Whatever it was, I'm glad it happened and I'm glad he's back because CM Punk is one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. We live in the timeline where there was a startup wrestling promotion that everyone doubted at first, and then they exceeded all expectations, and then they brought back CM Punk to wrestling. This will go down as one of the biggest signings in wrestling history. I have no problem saying that. In 2011, Punk advocated for change in the wrestling world, and how poetic is it that 10 years later in 2021, he finds himself surrounded by a group of wrestlers who built AEW off the motto, change the world. I'm quite happy for Punk because this is what he wanted all along, and now he gets to be a part of it and play a major role. So whatever he does next, you know the world will be watching. CM Punk is all elite. CM Punk is back in wrestling. But most importantly, CM Punk is home.